Hello and welcome to Have I Got 30 Years for You? Well, Paul, 30 years. That's a remarkable achievement for any TV show.
Absolutely, and I think it's really seeped into the public consciousness. I was watching an episode of Richard Osman's House of Games the other day, and one of the contestants was asked which popular TV quiz show started in 1990, feature as team captains Ian Hislop and Paul Merton, and give the name of the programme in reverse order. And without a moment's hesitation, the contestant said, Stars Shooting.
If you think that's tragic, I was watching The Chase.
That is tragic.
Yeah. And the question was, which Ian has been editor of a satirical magazine for over 30 years? Ian who? And the contestant said, again, just like that, Ian Himmler.
And is that the right answer?
It is, yeah.
That is Jeffrey Archer, in fact. He's talking about railways, about which he knows a great deal, having handed over £2,000 in notes to a prostitute on a railway station.
Allegedly.
I was very aware of it. Well, I mean, everybody was. It was a kind of radical, landscape-changing thing.
Paul and Jill, what have you come up with for this?
Take that, you old bag.
I am genuinely interested in politics and news and current affairs, so, and obviously like a laugh, so it's always been one of my favourite shows.
Some irresponsible vandal has had the audacity to paint a Hitler moustache on the portrait of Mrs Thatcher. It must be the first time she's been touched up since Cecil left.
I just thought it was so great to have a panel show like that that was about something, A, that I was really interested in, but B, that wasn't just knob jokes.
There is a connection with arms deals, and I'd better be slightly careful here. Maxwell was a crook and an arms dealer, and he's dead and he can't sue.
That moment in time, I would have found it inconceivable that any comedy show, particularly a panel show, would run for 30 years.
I'm sitting here with a tub of lard trying to answer questions in German.
Nobody lets you stay on TV for 30 years just because they, out of charity. You got to be good. And so that's what we call back home sustained excellence.
And the winner is Have I Got News for You?
It could not have existed at all. And the pilot was terrible, apparently. You can't really imagine that when you see it now.
The news quiz had been running 13 years when somebody had the idea for doing a thing a bit like it on television.
Good evening and welcome to News Round. In the news this week.
I knew John Lloyd because I'd worked as a writer on Spitting Image, and I knew he was absolutely brilliant, one of the great producers. And I thought, well, this'll probably be good.
And now a round to test our contestants' in-depth knowledge of the House of Commons as we ask them to name that member. For you, Paul and Simon...
Sometimes something can start off quite sort of out of focus, which is what it was. It was a bit blurry, nobody really knowing what they were meant to be doing.
The format didn't embrace the idea we were going to do a TV show. It was all very verbal.
3 members of the House who happily share a name with 3 world-famous generals.
Well, it's Bernard Rommel, I know that.
I'd never read an auto cue before. The thing that was really difficult was that these spontaneous jokes were actually coming at you, on string, and I wasn't a good enough actor.
Well, it's Richard Alexander. Richard Alexander, I don't know, where's he from? Newark, that's right.
My late mother, who came to see it, I sort of bounded up afterwards to see what she thought, and she said, "Never mind, dear."
Good night to you.
I said to Jimmy Mulville afterwards, I don't think this is me, and, get somebody else.
I think if you trust the people making the show and you feel there's potential for it and the pilot goes wrong, I like to think of, I have this phrase called failing to succeed. If you're going to succeed, you need to know about failure.
They then had to sort of, hold a couple of auditions and just get people to come in and do a sort of dry run of it, I suppose.
We auditioned Angus, we auditioned Sandy Toksvig, we even auditioned Chris Evans before he became Chris Evans.
When they suggested this pretty obscure radio guy and voiceover guy called Angus Deaton, they go, who?
So, put your feet up, take the phone off the hook and put your feet up.
At the time, Angus was best known for playing presenters on sketch shows. I mean, he was really good at acting the presenter of a show.
Good evening, and welcome to Have I Got News for You? As Iraq runs short of medical supplies, patients waiting for pacemakers are forced to improvise.
When Angus stepped into that chair, first time I saw him, I thought, he's much better than me. He's so good.
It's Bill Clinton's stated plan to send a peace envoy to Belfast. Clinton said that Americans want to put an end to violence in Ulster. Well, they could stop paying for it, for a start.
He could have been on the board of an advertising company. He was suave, he was cool, and he read the auto cue like it was coming out of his head. He was perfect.
So, it's goodbye from me, and it looks like it could be goodbye from her. Poppycock.
Angus was a very strong part of the trio that was making the show every week.
And he was a perfect foil, particularly for Paul. And every now and again, he and Paul would have an off-script kind of engagement.
Leslie Nielsen...
Nice suit. I always think Brown is tremendously underrated.
It was constructed as a sitcom. That was the genius, where Angus Deaton was the sort of father figure, the authority figure, and Ian was the good son who'd done his homework and knew everything, and Paul was the wayward son who'd been smoking around the back of the bike sheds.
Just going to blow my nose to make sure that this gets edited out.
I'll just carry on saying it then. Brown suit.
Right, where were we? Oh, yes.
We were talking about your brown suit.
But they would both kick against his authority in the middle.
Tony Blair and Gordon Brown have already been dubbed within the Labour Party the beautiful people. But then, given their main rivals are Margaret Beckett and Robin Cook, it's not that surprising.
They're not auditioning for Baywatch, Angus. It's their job to lead the Labour Party.
Well, they're the ones who are dubbed the beautiful people. I'm sorry, I can't do anything about it.
No, you carry on with your lookist rubbish. Go on, say Robin Cook looks like a garden gnome. I bet that's coming up.
Robin Cook, of course, looks like a garden gnome.
It was to do with somehow education, class, where you come from, also competition. They were competing with each other.
There was a story about a man called Paul Merson taking a huge amount of cocaine and appearing drugged in public, which understandably a lot of people thought was TV's own Paul Merton. It always had an edge, the relationship.
There was a thing going around that it was me for a while. There was a rumour going around. My wife got phoned up last week at the middle of the night, and she said...
I'm sorry. I am so sorry.
Did he ring up?
No, don't apologise. It wasn't a problem.
I think originally Paul, and he probably still does think this, thought I was just another classic Oxbridge stuffed shirt twit who hadn't done his time in comedy and didn't really know anything.
Oh, how poosh. More TV got...
That's a lovely impression you have of university.
That's you. Yeah, I went to Oxford, didn't you know? They walked through the quadrangle with our motorboards on. I thought it was important for me and Ian to have a rivalry as team captains, so I said to Ian very early on, I suggested that we should play the quiz element seriously, which he didn't need any persuasion on that, and that's how he saw it. And he does indeed still play the quiz element very seriously, which is a shame, because he very rarely wins.
To him tonight, turn the bastard over. I mean, what's he got? Nothing. Metal work O-level, and what have you got? Grounded in the classics, Greek, Latin, ancient history.
The dynamic between Angus and the other two was kind of odder, but of course it gave a flavour to the show.
And so to our odd one out round, in which a monkey with a pin has a 1 in 4 chance of getting it right. So let's see how he does. Paul.
I think if you've got a bit of acid in the mix and you can keep it under control so that nobody gets cross or sulks or shows it on camera, you've got a very good mix.
It's always a good idea to analyse what you're doing.
Well, if you're a brain surgeon, it is. Don't analyse what you're doing, for God's sake.
No.
It'll come down as reading out loud.
What was clear with Have I Got News for You early on was that it was incredibly well produced. The initial producer was a guy called Harry Thompson. He was, in a sense, in a classic mould that would go back to the 60s satire boom, you know, that was the week that was, of we're going to say what we shouldn't say, we don't mind whose feathers we ruffle.
And with Paul Merton this week, we were hoping to be joined by the Right Honourable Roy Hattersley, but sadly, and for the third time in our brief history, he's pulled out at the last minute due to having something better to do. So, as his replacement, liable to give much the same performance, and imbued with many of the same qualities, we're delighted to welcome a tub of lard.
Right from the early days when Harry Thompson was the producer and put the tub of lard on, there is an element of just... oh, let's do this and see what happens. Just let's shake this up. Let's have a go at this.
In his MacTaggart lecture this year, John Burt praised this programme. Have I Got News for You has carried forward an ancient national tradition of puncturing the powerful and pompous, said the puffed-up little twat.
Most of the time we talk about the risks you take in comedy. This time we were actually taking a bit of a risk with a man's life, because Salman Rushdie had written the Satanic Verses, and there was a fatwa out on him which seemed to give license to anyone to kill him if they wanted to.
I think this is Raymond Illingworth's bid to ban God, or at least the God's chaplain, from the dressing room.
Yeah.
I think there's not much to be said about that. He should be sentenced to death.
Jimmy Mulville said that there was one show very early on when I was sitting next to Robert Harris when the missing word was I made Maggie blank, said Nigel.
I made Thatcher what, boasts Nigel?
To swallow. Jimmy said afterwards, that hit the note that we should sort of, like, not necessarily be that rude, but that sort of kind of irreverence is something that we should probably sort of pursue.
People saying to me, how are you allowed to be that rude about the government? And I explained to them, this is the point of being in Britain. This is one of the freedoms we have.
The Suicide Pact will be enforced if the Tory rebels have their way, although if John Major did try and blow his own brains out, it'd have to be a bloody good shot.
That's not kind at all.
No, it's quite funny, though, isn't it?
I think that's maybe one of the reasons it's endured so long, is that it doesn't feel didactic, actually, which a lot of political comedy just feels like I'm going to take you from this position of ignorance to the correct position. Whereas they seem neither merely political nor just silly.
On which note, I leave you with news that at a crowded London party, someone shouts, "Oi, dickhead," across the room.
I've said to politicians in the past, they said, I thought I'd have a go at Ian. I said, no, don't have a go at Ian, honestly, because he'll come back at you and he'll make you look silly.
What is possible at the Ritz?
Anything.
Dinners.
Dinners,
Dinners
no.
is no. Grammar's not good there.
No,
Dinners is possible. Grammar's not the strong point of Private Eye.
He edits a magazine. You can't expect him to know these things.
No. I know, he's made me a cover girl.
What did we say?
Oh,
that was it. You were saying, what would it take to make you resign? And he said about 10 grand in a brown envelope. Grammar all right there for you?
I think so.
Ian's forensic and quite moral analysis of events always feels worth listening to.
They found you guilty, didn't they, Conrad, the jury?
9 acquittals, complemented by a unanimous vacation of the 4 guilty verdicts by the Supreme Court of the U.S.
Didn't they? One for fraud and one for obstruction of justice.
Ian, please.
Oh, stop reciting the verdict as though it was true.
It's great that There are people like Ian who still have what looks like and very much seems to be integrity.
And I've come here...
You come here to say you're innocent, which is sweet, but not true.
The audience wants Ian to tell us who are the heroes and villains here, what do we need to know, and for Paul to make it all okay by finding a joke or moving it on.
Well, it's all about chads, isn't it? Which is the mark that those punching machines makes. And the argument at the moment is over dimple chads. If there's a good, honest American hole in it, it's a Republican vote. Yeah. Whereas if there's a dimple, it's a sort of liberally Democrat.
It's a sitcom in that. At Home with the Chads. You've got the hanging chad, he's like the public hangman. You've got the swinging chad, who's the groovy teenager. The tri-chad, he's in a Chinese gang. And the pregnant one's obviously the one who's sort of, is pregnant. I've got it now, actually.
Paul Merton has no perceivable run-up, which is very rare in a performer. Most of the time, when someone's improvising, you see them scrabble around, and you see a sense of cogs whirring and them trying to reach for the right word or to bend the situation to something that will work comically, whereas his attack on it seems immediate.
all the way home.
Yeah.
He ran in, slammed the door in the badger's face, and then
The badger shot through the cat flap. Badger held him hostage, got hold of a potato
Held him
peeler. The mum came home, the badger overpowered her, took over her identity and her credit cards. She was locked down in the cellar. When the husband came home, poor husband, a little bit pissed, walks in, sees a figure in the bed wearing a negligee, thinks to himself, is it Friday night already? And before you know where he is, he puts the light on and he goes, oh my God, I fucked the badger.
The team didn't view it as a big show. They viewed it as a niche show on BBC Two. And I viewed it as having the potential to be a mainstream show on BBC One.
Welcome to a brand new series of Have I Got News for You, now on BBC One for the first time, although we'd like to reassure our regular BBC Two viewers that the move to mainstream television will in no way affect the show's content.
Because BBC Two was really where edgy comedy had always been, and BBC One was mainstream, and you thought, well, what are we doing on BBC One?
Ian and Paul were worried, and Angus, because they thought they'd have to tone down the comedy. And I was like, no, 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 I want the show exactly the same as it is.
It's the war on terror in Afghanistan, where America's precision bombing of military targets has intensified with the use of missiles so accurate they can hit the exact centre of a big red cross.
After the first show, the audience was so good, I think everybody's fears were allayed. It was a hit from the start.
It's Thursday, it's 7 o'clock, it's BBC One, and that can mean only one thing. Yes, we're just half an hour away from EastEnders.
Angus became incredibly famous. He was Mr. Sex, and so in the green room there'd be half the Manchester United football team and celebs.
When Angus became famous and started doing adverts for Barclaycard and things like that, they would take the mickey out of him mercilessly.
On which note, we finish the Christmas edition of How I Got News for You. But first, in Reading, police are worried that Oliver Reed's drinks cabinet has flooded once again. He was very robust. He knew what he was doing. He wouldn't be thrown by me saying, "Are you still here?" or whatever it was.
I don't think anyone really disliked each other.
I mean, I still, you know, when there isn't a major pandemic sweeping the world, go and have a Guinness with Paul afterwards, because we always used to in the early days. And I mean, I was very friendly with Angus. Obviously, it's not anymore, sadly.
Of course, you know, what happened in the end was tragic.
Do you think there's people here that come every week?
Yeah, I'm one of them. And that fellow over there looks familiar. I'm not quite sure. Not sure who he is, but I think he's here every week and all. There used to be another guy. I don't know what happened to him.
Usually when there's a bad story about to break, you know, you'd know that it was going to be in the daily paper the next day. So I got a call the evening before saying that there was going to be a story about Angus in the papers.
So there we were, just sort of like looking at this, in absolute amazement, astonishment.
We decided that, you know, what was happening between consenting adults, and this was an adult programme, so we would let Angus continue in the role. But I remember looking him and his agent in the eye and saying, tell me whether there's anything else to come out, and they both said there wasn't.
I rang Angus and told him that we're going to do the show this week, and we will prepare the show, and it will not involve this story. The script will not have this story in it. I couldn't guarantee what Paul and Ian would say.
Oh, there's a man having his chips. Trying to join the Labour Party, probably. That's Ken. I think this is a thing about party funding.
This has been one story of the week, isn't it? But the one I'm really interested in, Angus, is...
I mean, we'd been incredibly rude about any other celebrity caught up in anything similar, and we would have to do the same with him.
Now, you and this prostitute, how did you manage to get off paying her?
She didn't tell me that she's a prostitute.
She didn't tell you? The idea was he's got to be given a hard time. Get through that, show him sort of like, you know, having a bit of a hard time. Then we can come out the other side of this and we can then carry on.
I don't want to dwell on this, but... He made me groan all night. Yeah, what were you doing? Reading the autocue?
You know, I ripped in fairly early on in round one, but there was no way we could not do it.
Is that it, or do you want to... Because obviously there was another question that I was
There's a
asking
world
about.
war breaking out in India.
So the ethics committee that you were talking about...
Angus wanted to focus on making the show, even if there were photographers outside the building, you know, waiting to snap him coming out. He was aware it wasn't going to be comfortable. I just don't think he was aware of just how uncomfortable it was going to be.
Sorry.
Thank goodness I took a line of coke before I came on.
I felt so sorry for Angus for all this eruption in his career, so I wasn't going to be jumping in on it. So if you look back at that, I can't think of any other episode where I said so little.
You did describe yourself as a model of new Labour conformity.
Really? Oh, what was I on at the time?
Angus can sort you
out. Shall I quit while I'm down?
I was amazed that Angus turned up. I mean, and I thought he handled it really well.
I think it's very bad, really, to have brought the newspapers on. Imagine going to that kind of effort to, you know, I mean, I was as guilty of Ian, really, of sort of bringing on the front cover of the News of the World. I mean, it's really... To go to all that kind of effort is just unbelievable.
I think for the viewers, it turned out to be classic.
So how many journalists are here still? I noticed the two people who left earlier.
Daily Mail, the guy in the Mail, he was sitting here, he's left.
Oh, is he?
Yeah. Oh, no. I was hoping to catch up.
Of course, we thought that was it. And then 6 months later, in October, we discovered that there were more allegations coming out.
And this is where it becomes really difficult to do, because you can't keep making the same jokes every week. But then if I don't say something or Ian doesn't say something, the guests will say something.
No, it was a very tidy sum. Done sight more than you get paid to be on this programme.
Well, they pay what people are worth.
There was a defining moment, for me anyway, when Christine Hamilton got the best of Angus. When he was rude about Neil Hamilton, her husband, she rounded on him and gave him both barrels.
Peter Stringfellow, Piers Morgan, Stephen Fry, and disgraced former Tory MP Neil Hamilton.
Hang on, wait a moment. Would you mind cutting out the word
No,
disgrace
that's-
when you refer to my husband in
Certainly,
future?
I will.
I was so furious with him. You know, how dare you? How absolutely dare you? After everything you've done, how dare you use that word about my husband?
If he's disgraced, what are you?
Exactly. Disgraced, I think. Though I haven't banged on about family values for the last 7 years.
The very small amount of moral high ground that the show needed in order to operate had been taken away.
I mean, that week, I rang the BBC and said, we can't make the show anymore.
We tried to stand by him, but once the show was damaged by what he had done, then he had to go.
I actually felt very bad about that afterwards, and I wrote to Angus and I expressed my regret at what had happened. He never responded to the letter. I don't know whether he ever got it, but I wished him well and said I'm sorry for any part that I've unwittingly played.
I thought they might sack the whole show, which would have been understandable.
They said, OK, what are you going to do? I said, I've got no idea. We'll think of something. And that week I said to Paul Merton, you always said how easy it is on the show to host this show. You said a monkey could do it. Well, actually, it's your turn this week.
Good evening and welcome to Have I Got News For You. We'd like to apologise for the recording fault in last week's episode. It should have ended like this.
Good night.
Amongst some of the producers, there was a feeling that this might be the end of the show. One producer was really nervous about what it was going to be like and was talking to me in makeup in such a nervous, anxiety-ridden way. I said, look, can you just go and sit down somewhere, take a deep breath, it'll be fine. What was it? Any other freak happenings in this storm?
Bearded ladies punching people.
Bearded ladies punching people, extra point, that certainly happened. It is a different show, isn't it? I don't know.
It didn't happen under the old regime, sorry.
No, it didn't. No. There was a few journalists amongst the audience, in the studio audience, ready to write down, have I got news for you, flops, end of series, as various...
That was me.
Yes, that's right. This is the... Next.
Are you new at this?
I am, yes. This is...
the discovery of Saddam Hussein.
I've absolutely no desire to sit in the chair. A, I don't think I'd do it very well. No, I'm sure I wouldn't do it very well. And B...
Oh, no, of course you would.
No.
I totally missed that cue.
Your timing is so terrible.
I totally missed that cue. I really am sorry. So until next week, when someone else will be sitting in this chair, my money's on Sooty. Good night. That's what I needed to do, was I needed to demonstrate that somebody else can host this show.
The following week, I rang up Anne Robinson, who I knew, and she was the Queen of Mean at the time on The Weakest Link, and probably the most famous, one of the most famous faces on British television. And she jumped at it because she's a journalist.
Do you want me to recap on the scores at this point?
Do you like, love? We've got a lot of people to see, so we can keep it coming.
For me, it was fantastic because she'd been one of Robert Maxwell's great defenders. And here was someone who was still banging on about how this terrific crook who'd made my life miserable by suing me every 5 minutes was suddenly on the show. It was great.
You used to get 250 grand, didn't you?
That's true.
From Robert Maxwell, wasn't it?
Yes, indeed, I did.
Still, he's dead now, isn't he?
He is indeed. Thank
Yes.
goodness.
That's not what you said afterwards.
And I suddenly thought, oh, I see. There's another world that could open up with people bringing their own stuff.
Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome to Have I Got News?
Have I got news?
Have I Got News for you?
For you, I'm Stephen Mangan.
I'm Miranda Hart.
I'm Bill Bailey.
I used to be John Pertwee.
We did entertain the idea of a permanent host. In fact, we went down the road of kind of auditioning people along those lines.
Good evening and welcome to Have I Got News for You? I'm Alexander Armstrong, and if I seem a little uncomfortable tonight, it's because I'm sitting on Matthew Parris's column.
We did some run-throughs in some basement studio somewhere in Soho. Not with Ian and Paul, but with Jimmy Mulville, actually, the head of Hat-Trick. And that was quite good fun, actually. I did enjoy that, but nerve-wracking.
And there's disturbing evidence of how a young Boris Johnson got his big break in the Conservative Party. Good night.
There were quite a number of people being lined up, and so therefore it did become a little bit competitive.
The Australian man denied that his life is ruled by his obsession with lager, though he does have 4 ex-wives and a foster child.
Kirsty Young was terrific. There was always an element of someone quite strict keeping the show on the road.
Finished?
Yeah, we have.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Former editor at
No,
the
we
Today...
Sorry, childish. Do carry on.
Thank you. Former
I'm going
editor...
to start now, you see. Now the game started, you see.
You do this every time I'm here.
No, we don't.
Yes, you do.
No, please.
No, it's our version of name that word.
In your own time. The thing about having a guest host every week is I'm sure that's added to the longevity of the show because of the 5 people on screen, 3 of them weren't there the week before.
In conversations with the BBC, obviously they did their research and they said, we think the guest host thing is really working.
We're talking 16 million, aren't we?
No.
No? Too
you
little?
read too many papers.
I do.
No, it's nowhere near as much as that. I have to pay 40% tax, everything.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yes.
There was this frisson, who's going to be sitting in the chair this week? Are they going to be any good? Are they going to be funny? You know, what particular aspect of their personalities are they going to bring?
So let's find out how the teams line up. Captain Ian Hislop plays on the right if the government's on the left, and on the left if the government's on the right. Captain Paul Merton, like Jamie Vardy, who started off in an amateur steelworkers team, Paul kicked off his career with a CSE in metalwork.
The logic would have been that guest hosts should be comedians. This is a comedy show. But what was striking was that you could put in, as a guest host, somebody like William Hague, not a comedian at all, a politician, and a frontline politician, a very senior politician, and he'd be brilliant.
Yes, it's the latest developments on Iraq.
That not register in your brain, William, that booing?
No, it's used to it.
You'll find it washes over him.
I was with the Tory party long enough to know how to ignore booze.
So you weren't very popular then?
Listen, just because I tell jokes doesn't mean you should have political opinions.
I do love it when they get these very famous actors as hosts. They are invariably brilliant, and there's always an extra bit of spark and spice when they say something edgy.
Did anybody read anything about other cast members in the phone hacking scandal this week?
Rebecca Wade, the former editor of the News of the World and The Sun, is having a baby. But it's through a surrogate, and she's asked for privacy.
That is correct. She's expecting a baby via a surrogate mother, or as The Sun might have put it, disgraced ginger dragon to have Frankenstein baby.
There's a real factor, which this show still has after decades.
They know they're reading someone else's lines, you know, if they're presenting, so that's absolutely fine. And yet, there's the idea that they have to kind of riff or be interesting outside the framework. And that, I think, terrifies them.
What have Ed Balls and Ed Miliband been hinting at?
Been hinting at?
Yeah.
What have they been hinting at?
Don't know.
So posh.
You're wearing a suit.
Yeah, I can afford it.
That's because you don't pay any tax.
You know, you come in and you're excited, it's a great opportunity, but then you're going to be alongside people who actually do comedy for real.
This is the triumph of Foxes, Leicester City. They might get relegated next year. That'd be funny, wouldn't it?
What, of course, you don't know is what direction you're going to be led in.
So the Labour Party, they have sort of houses which they put themselves in, and the Lib Dems have houses which they put their children in, and the Tories have houses which they put their ducks in.
And they start talking about something that is on sort of the 6th little card of notes you've got in front of you. And you're thinking, right, oh, God, yes, what did the council leader so-and-so have to say about that? Yes,
And it seems to go too quick, and the cards, I'm getting muddled, and my glasses are on and off, and I'm thinking... And now I'm starting to having a nervous breakdown.
And then Paul's suddenly gone off on some fantastic sort of, his synapses just gone like they do.
How would you advise having sex with Mike Tyson?
You go in understanding full well it may not go the way you plan.
Yeah.
And you've got to try and bring it back.
What has Anne Widdecombe...
She had sex with Mike Tyson.
And so this is basically the job.
What has Anne Widdecombe offered to do if it would help, and it's not to do with Mike Tyson?
When you get that first laugh, it's like, that's all right.
And following the arrest of several senior officials, FIFA bring in a new face to help eradicate the culture of greed.
Well, there was an amazing surprise, which I guess was Bruce Forsyth.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much. Whoa, thank you. They can't all be wrong, can they? Anyway, good evening. Yes, the papers weren't lying. It is me. But don't worry, there'll be no gimmicks, no catchphrases. So welcome to Have I Got News for You? For you, have I got...
He was actually quite nervous just before going on, just backstage. He was a bit nervous, which surprised me. But he said, I don't know what they're going to be like. I don't know whether they're going to like me or not. He said, I don't know what the sort of audience is. But that was really good to see because it showed he was caring. He was really wanting this to work. And as soon as he walked out through the glittery curtains and the audience erupted.
It's definitely time for...
It is that feeling of witnessing something. I have to say, the Iraqi play your cards right about the rewards being offered on various Iraqi war criminals. You just thought, well, that's utterly bonkers.
Now, these are the cards that the Americans... Please. This is satire.
That's about as bad taste as anything that has ever been on television. And it was Bruce Forsyth doing it.
Thank you, Bruce.
It's the king of clubs. RCC vice chairman is that Ibram. Now then, it's a high card. So, think about this. The audience will help you. Do you think it's higher or lower?
I'm not sure this programme can go much lower.
So I remember watching that thinking this is fantastic television because it was like a planetary collision, but hugely entertaining, and there was a lot of love in it as well.
Tony Blair insists that weapons of mass destruction will eventually be found in Iraq. Well, it would be nice to see them.
The Bruce Forsyth show, I think, is Paul's favourite show. And part of that is because he thinks I hated it and had no idea what was going on.
I've been waiting 14 years for the show to be like this. I'm having the time of my life.
It's undoubtedly partly because he was on Have I Got News for You that we ended up casting him as the host of Strictly Come Dancing.
It's a new first for television, invisible tap dancing.
I think one of the big things we can say about the show is that it's one of the few comedy programmes, if not the only comedy programme, who has really delivered as a Prime Minister.
And with Paul Merton tonight is a Daily Telegraph journalist who last year took a month off to spend some time on his own. He stood as a Conservative candidate in Wales, Boris Johnson.
I remember ringing Ian to say, oh, we've got this journalist who seems pretty funny, Boris Johnson doing it. And Ian said, the Jackal. And you go, what? And so Ian told us about this phone call that Boris had been involved in, which I must admit I didn't know about.
The conversation was along the lines of Darius, or Darius. I never went to school with anybody called that. A conversation about whether Boris could get a journalist beaten up for some story that Mr. Guppy didn't like.
We constructed an odd one out about taped phone conversations to give Ian the opportunity to just bring up the subject.
I'm surprised you gave me this one.
Why?
Because Boris was caught on tape as well.
Ha ha ha, richly comic, yes, that's.
Sorry, what was that?
I said, no, good point.
Yeah. He said, ha ha ha, richly comic, which it jolly well was.
What were you recorded saying?
Honestly, I don't remember.
I do. Boris was on tape talking to Darius Guppy. His
a very great man. I don't want to be totally stitched up here.
What you want and what you don't want.
I'm way out of my depth here. I've been totally stitched up. I want it on the record. I walked straight into a massive elephant trap. I should have spotted it.
Boris was completely furious. He was always cross. He always thought that I, in particular, was out to get him. Which, is fair enough.
No. We can't have that sort of
Give him a nudge, will you, Ian?
I have to say, sort of very early on from when we were trying to book guest hosts, Boris was kind of the one I really wanted to do it.
Yeah. Hello. Good evening and welcome to Have I Got News for You? In the news this week, undiscovered footage from William Hague's school days supports his claims that he used to drink 14 pints a night.
I think the narrative that Have I Got News for You made Boris is just a total misreading of what happened. The joke about Boris was that this man can't even run a panel show. He literally couldn't get the cards in order. He had no idea who anything was or who anyone was. He was a joke.
Paul. No, Paul.
Yes. I wanted Basil Brush. I wanted Basil Brush. I'm not sure we haven't got him.
He was so funny. I think he was actually funnier on it than I was.
Absolutely right. Give that man a coconut. He said they're
Give that man a what?
A coconut, or whatever the prize you get.
I don't want a coconut.
No, I'm going to have a point. Have several points.
I've changed my mind, Boris. I will have a coconut.
We'll have to get the catering.
I bet I end up with less coconuts.
Boris hasn't really changed his act since he was presenting Have I Got News for You, to be fair.
Whether or not we can supply coconut or not, I don't know. But I'll tell you exactly...
So, hang on a minute. You're offering coconuts, and yet you have not... there's no facility to give me a coconut.
You're promising something you can't deliver, which is what you accuse the Labour Party of.
You look at these broadcasts that he does with the two team captains at either side of him, it's exactly the same thing on the virus.
Boris was a star. He wasn't a particularly well-known politician, but he was a personality. He was a character.
From the party that keeps its promises.
There's a lot about Boris which makes him a really good comedy entertainer. That is the job he should have been employed to do.
They are Boris Johnson for Have I Got News for You?
People are surprised when I tell them, 1 year he was nominated for a BAFTA for Best Performance in an Entertainment Programme. And you could see he was very keen to win the award.
Jonathan Ross for Friday Night with Jonathan Ross.
When Boris became Prime Minister, I think there was sort of like some journalistic outlets that were desperately trying to turn this into the story of Have I Got News for You has made Boris Johnson Prime Minister.
If you look at the history of the show, nearly everybody who's been on more times than Boris became Prime Minister. Ken Livingstone, yeah. Charles Kennedy, yeah, absolutely.
If you're going to blame someone, you can blame the voters, which I do, or you can blame the system.
I mean, I didn't vote Boris in. I thought he was absolutely unsuitable and unfit for any office. The whole of London, Europe's biggest electorate, votes Boris in twice, so don't blame us.
The broadcast can finish of an episode, and about the very same episode, one bunch of people will scream typical right-wing establishment crap. The other side will say typical BBC lefty nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, the government essentially has done a U-turn on a number of things which the public don't agree with. You know, and that's not government, as you know, Alistair. A million people march past saying we don't want the war. You don't listen to them.
Do you know what Tommy Robinson does for a living?
Used to run a tanning shop.
Exactly right, yes.
What,
he
changing the
runs
colour of people's skin?
Yeah.
So your customer comes in, come in, madam, and next after half an hour later, you can get out.
It's the very fact that this show can still trouble and infuriate such a wide range of people that makes it great.
Well, I'll tell you other things you've said about him is he is a turbo weirdo.
Correct.
A weaponised lentil. An extraordinary half-resuscitated goat.
It is quite blokey. I think we can be perfectly honest about this. It is quite blokey. Or at least it was at when I started.
I bet Chris Evans is ringing him even now, don't you think?
Go on, Jeremy, punch him.
I mean, the whole thing is ruthless. It's the Roman arena with mangled corpses in all directions.
What I actually said was that women who are self-destructive, in particular those women whose self-image is so low that they cannot appear in public without their hair birds nested all over the place, 3 inches of exposed cleavage and fuck me shoes. I didn't actually name anybody.
This was in a piece about Suzanne Moore, though, wasn't it?
Why would shoes want to be fucked anyway?
The thing you have to do is you have to step up to the plate. You can't just sit there and simper.
What sort of shoes are you wearing, Jermaine?
Don't fuck me shoes. Leave me alone, shoes, or I'll kick you in the face, shoes.
I thought it was frightening, and I was scared that I wouldn't be able to think of funny things to say. But I really felt it was important because there were so few women to actually go on and kind of, you know, suffer it, if you like.
That's Terry Wogan paying Cher an awful lot of money, 20 grand, a pound for every year of her life, to come on his show. You know, she got 20 grand, right? I got 800. She got a new bum, and I went down Quick Fit and had one of my blackheads squeezed.
I remember being on the show with Jo Brand. Probably she was hosting and I was a guest. And she made a joke about eating a strawberry ice cream that was so filthy, I was literally helpless.
A group of Finnish lawyers has suggested new EU sexual harassment laws should cover women eating ice creams provocatively in front of male colleagues. I wouldn't do that. I always make sure I'm alone before I open my mivvy.
They're good hosts, and then they're just crazy hosts who are just, you know, the Brian Blesseds. I mean, I can't even remember when the camera was turned on, and it didn't matter. He's the same, isn't he?
Yes.
You know, from the moment he comes in the room to when he taxi goes again.
Good evening and welcome to Have I Got News for You. I am Brian Blessed.
I think the original motivation may have been, because I think we were at the time when Gordon Brown was either Chancellor or briefly Prime Minister, they just wanted Brian Blessed to shout, "Gordon's alive." I think that was it.
Now, in the news this week, the polls continue to slide for Gordon Brown, and some people are saying he's dead and buried. But I think the opposite. I say, Gordon's alive! My darlings!
When someone like him is hosting it, you kind of just have to lash yourself to the mast and get through it, because it's not going to, nuance isn't going to necessarily creep into it. So you have to sort of kind of get in where you can.
I suppose you are the only gay Tory, aren't you?
Actually, there
Are you gay?
Brian, you'd never guess you were an actor.
There are very few people in my life that I've been able to impress my sister with. And, you know, I ring up and say, oh, you know, I've met Nelson Mandela. And she goes, oh, yeah. But I finally got to ring her up and say, you have no idea who I'm having dinner with. And she said, yeah, who? And I said, William Shatner. And that was it. Finally a win.
William Shatner was on the show. William Shatner hosted Have I Got News for You? I mean, that's extraordinary, isn't it?
Good evening to you. And welcome to Have I Got News for You.
I'm not sure he really understood what the show was. He didn't know who any of the public figures who we were doing jokes about were. He didn't know that Ilfracombe was a town.
This is the Olympic torch, which is boldly going where no Olympic torch has gone before. Namely, yes, I agree with you. Namely, Truro and Ilfracombe.
Sounds deeply sexual.
Kind of like a cigar advert. Have you been to Ilfracombe?
I have.
The place is laced with prostitution.
He got about a third of the way into the show, and then the kind of madness of it started to take over.
God save the Queen. The fascist regime. They made you a moron. Potential H-bomb.
He kept looking at me, and he would wink at me. Quite a few times he winked at me, which was slightly unsettling in a way.
Oh, no, 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 no. I'm a rocket man.
I'm just overwhelmed by this. They have to reinvent the wheel each week, don't they? That's why the writers are so good, because those writers have to write jokes that are going to be said by completely different people every week.
Outside Westminster Planning Department, there are suspicions that developers are attempting to bribe John Prescott.
The website went on to say it's traditional for a couple of threepenny bits to go into the pudding, although if you're not keen on that, get cook to wear an apron.
Time now for the Missing Words round, which this week features as its guest publication the Powerful Owl newsletter, which obviously they've got because of my association with owls. I once killed an owl with a shovel. No, sorry.
There's various elements to make up the show. You've got the news itself, you have the guests, you have me and Ian, and you have the person who's hosting it. When the news is really good, I mean by good, I don't mean necessarily uplifting, I mean richly comic and full of potential. You know, it can really take off then.
The start of the Great North Run, London to Durham, and there's the eye test. Mr. Cummings, can you see why everyone's so angry with you and think you should resign, you complete and utter fraud?
Dominic Cummings' visit to the castle happened at the end of our last series, which was filmed in lockdown, so each one of us was in our own individual cells. That was a very strong show. Ian was particularly exhilarated to be talking about it on British television.
He gave the impression in pieces in The Spectator, and he got his wife to write pieces, suggesting he was in London, which he wasn't. This man has become the centre of the story, and I cannot understand why he hasn't resigned.
Paul, maverick genius?
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you. I didn't realise I'd be getting an award this evening, but I'd just like to say this award isn't just for me. It's for everybody, for those people behind the scenes who...
I was furious, you know, for personal reasons because of care homes and obeying the rules then, and like lots of people, you know, been unable to say goodbye to loved ones and all that stuff.
Mark Sedwell had coronavirus, Boris had it, Matt Hancock had it. In fact, the whole government had it.
And you know why that is, Janet? Because the virus targets low-skill workers.
The world, even at its blackest, is quite a comic place. And it's almost never true that there is nothing funny or nothing, certainly bleakly comic, about what's going on.
Oscar Pistorius has been sent to a prison in Pretoria where gang rape and violence are rife. You have to be particularly careful in the showers, because Oscar Pistorius might shoot you through the door. The more difficult it gets to make edgy jokes, the more people scream and roar and say you shouldn't make it, the more it's a sort of moral imperative to keep doing it.
I was just going to say that also by funding Islamic fundamentalism, it pays off the guilt the Saudis feel for their lives of luxury, a bit like Jimmy Savile's charity work. Oh, come on, grow up!
The fact that they're still there, they're still entertaining you, and they're still sort of in the midst of this extraordinarily chaotic world which we now inhabit. So we need shows like Have I Got News for You?
Doctors injected Trump with a potentially lethal cocktail of experimental and untested drugs, but somehow he pulled through. Who do you think's going to get it next? Yeah. In the US sort of presidential world.
Oh, I see, not
Yes.
Mrs. Watkins at number 23.
Who's closest to Trump? Oh, Putin. I mean, looking back over 500 shows and goodness knows how many guests, it's pretty extraordinary. I can't quite get my head round it.
Did Ian say nice things about me when you interviewed him? He didn't, did he? He didn't, did he?
I don't think he mentioned you.
Yeah.
My feelings on Paul. Oh, right, yes, Paul Merton. Yes, he's still on it, isn't he?
Paul, could you ever find it in your heart to put your bitter rivalry to one side and form a coalition with Ian?
Yeah, all right.
Go on, then.
If you switched on and Ian or Paul wasn't there, it's like the Ravens leaving the Tower of London. I mean, it would spook people. It's almost a matter of national duty that they would be there where people expect to see them.
I've got a feeling you're going to win this week.